MSW Media.
Season 4 of How We Win is here.
For the past 4 years, we've been making history in critical elections all over the country. And last year, we made history again by expanding our majority in the Senate, beating election-denying Republicans in crucial state house races, and fighting back a non-existent red wave.
But the MAGA Republicans who plotted and pardoned the attempted overthrow of our government now control the House, thanks to gerrymandered maps and repressive anti-voter laws. And the chaotic spectacle we've already seen shows us just how far they will go to seize power, dismantle our government, and take away our freedoms.
So, the official podcast of the Persistence is back with Season 4. There's so much more important work ahead of us to fight for equity, justice, and our very democracy itself. We'll take you behind the lines and inside the rooms where it happens with strategy and inspiration from progressive changemakers all over the country.
And we'll dig deep into the weekly news that matters most and what you can do about it with messaging and communications expert, co-founder of Way to Win, and our new co-host, Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
So join Steve and I every Wednesday for your weekly dose of inspiration, action, and hope.
I'm Steve Pearson.
And I'm Jennifer Fernandez-Ancona.
And this is How We Win.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So yeah, now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Clean Up on Aisle 45. It is Wednesday, March 23rd. 23 is my favorite number. And this is episode 62. I'm your co-host, Allison Gill. And with me, as always, is real-life lawyer out from the dungeon, the lawyer dungeon from underneath my house, Andrew Torrez.
Allison, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. I'm being dragged by right-wing trolls on Twitter this morning, and it's actually really fun for me.
Are you triggered yet, libtard? Yeah. So is 23 your favorite number? Is that a Michael Jordan thing? Is that
no? Although when I was living in Highland Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, we're just walking around the neighborhoods, going to Larry's Lizard Lounge after being in the military for the day, and there's a giant gate with a huge gold number 23 on it, and I'm like, whoa, what's this? And everyone looks at me like, you don't know who lives here? It was like 8 feet tall, gold 23 on the gates outside of Michael Jordan's house. But no, just an old, 5 is my favorite number. It's a balance thing. It's a justice thing.
All right.
So anyway.
Well, that's I just needed to know. So, and with that in mind, I as always want to thank our new patrons. So big shout out, big thank you to Jack Arnett, Patricia Inslee, Niall Jones, Jackie Riley, Jake Moss, Jakob, Hypnosis Enthusiast. Hey, only use those powers for good, not evil. And Kayla L. Penny.
And if you would like to join them, you can head over to patreon.com/aisle45pod. That's AISLE45POD. And sign up for as little as $1 an episode. And now, on with the show.
So, Allison, if you interacted with humans over the weekend, you probably heard the story of Lia Thomas. And I say heard because, let's face it, the odds that you were watching the NCAA Women's 500-meter freestyle swimming championships are just about zero, and are definitely zero if you're complaining about them. So, because trans folks are the Republican Party's punching bag right now, if you've heard about this story, chances are you've heard it in the viral form crafted by Fox News, only, with more slurs. So that story is, and this is what we are debunking, a man who couldn't hack it in men's swimming declared himself to be a woman, just like Mike Huckabee said, and shattered every known record because, trans women are really men, the end.
I don't know about shattering every record. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, but it should not surprise you to learn that no part of that entire bullshit story is true. Lia Thomas won the 500 freestyle at women's swimming and diving NCAA championships, becoming the first known transgender athlete to win an NCAA championship title. Her time, 4 minutes, 33.24 seconds, did not shatter any records. In fact, although 27 different swimming records were broken at the NCAA championships this year, 27 different swimming records, Lia did not break a single one of them. Not an American, U.S. Open, NCAA meet, or even a pool record.
So, and just to pile on here, and again, celebrate the accomplishment. She is way better at this than you or I. Lia's time of 4:33.24, it's not even in the top 50 in this country of all-time fastest swims in the 500-meter freestyle, right? It would not have won the event at 6 of the last 9 years of competition. And in some of those years, it wouldn't even have been enough to finish second, right? To continue to put it in context, one of Lia's competitors, Brooke Ford, finished fourth in the race this weekend, had an off day. Had Brooke placed with her best historical time, that's 4:31.34, she would have beat Lia by 1.9 seconds or more than the margin of victory of 1.75 seconds that Lia won this event for.
Well, she actually won by about 400,000 seconds, but we only need 11,780. So Lia isn't destroying women's records, okay? The other half of that slur just isn't true either, that Lia was some sort of walk-on or just wasn't very good before her transition. Some have even attached a number to it, claiming she was 462nd when on the men's team and now first. That 462nd ranking, as far as anyone can tell, is just made up.
Yeah.
According to U.S. Swimming, Lia's official rankings were 12th in the 1,000-yard men's freestyle in 2018 and 12th in the same event in 2019. 462.
Yeah.
In other words, Lia was a standout athlete prior to her transition. And going from 12th to 1st is a pattern athletes follow all the time. So,
yeah. Absolutely. So, just to recap, in case your Uncle Frank hit you with this one over the weekend. And by the way, a nice comeback when Uncle Frank corners you and presents the slur is, hey, that's cool. Can you name 5 Olympic women's swimmers? Can you name 5 members of the WNBA? Right? Like they did. All of a sudden, these folks only care about women's sports when they make it a political football. But to recap, Lia Thomas didn't wash out of men's sports. She didn't pretend to be a girl and then shatter all known records. She was a world-class athlete pre-transition. She is a world-class athlete now. And trans women aren't dominating women's sports, despite the fact that trans women have been allowed to compete in the women's Olympic category since 2004. Only one trans woman has qualified, and she didn't medal in her event. There are lots of reasons for this. If you do the research, if you read the science, it will become obvious that, the Mike Huckabee, yuck, I'm just going to call myself a girl and hang out in the women's room. That doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It doesn't give you magic special advantages in sports. Trans people do not dominate sports. Cis people dominate sports.
Yes, very well said, my friend. Thank you. And in other news, we have a new court filing from the Department of Justice in the Enrique Tarrio Proud Boys superseding indictment case. That's a mouthful. I'm going to say it again. We have a new court filing from the Department of Justice in the Enrique Tarrio Proud Boys superseding indictment. On March 8th, when they arrested Tarrio in his tighty-whities, and he was surprised, just as we all were, because the DOJ is operating very tight-lipped these days, They superseded the Proud Boys indictment to add 2 new defendants, Tarrio and Pezzola, and they added new charges, a host of new charges: conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstructing an official proceeding, aiding and abetting, along with assaulting or impeding an officer. So, Andrew, what generally when I'm trying to find out the purpose of a filing, I read the title. What was the purpose of this filing?
So this is a motion to vacate the trial date and to exclude time under the Speedy Trial Act. You listened to last Thursday's opening arguments. If you saw the story in the news in which the DOJ rightfully admitted that it had, due to an inmate that was being transferred from Texas to D.C., just failed to abide by the deadlines, which is 30 days from arrest to indictment. That's a pretty short window. And now they are making sure that they have dotted all their I's, crossed all their T's. The initial trial was set for May, and the DOJ argues that due to a few factors, they need more time to submit discovery. Part of that is the government's affirmative obligation, Brady and Giglio, to produce material that may be exculpatory to criminal defendants. And they note that 2 of the defendants' attorneys agree that more time is needed, and those 2 defendants are Tarrio and Pezzola.
Yeah. They're like, yeah, we definitely need more time.
Of course
and
they
there's
do.
A few things that stand out to me in this filing asking to vacate that May trial date. The first things are called cross-discovery and global discovery. And this is new to me. I mean, it makes sense, but, this is the first time I've seen this in a filing. It seems generally in a single standalone case, like a guy robbed a bank, discovery includes case-specific evidence that relates to that case, right? Case-specific discovery. But here, the DOJ says with nearly 800 defendants, we need to introduce the idea of global discovery and cross-discovery. So let's start with cross-discovery. Can you explain that?
Sure. So actually, let's take a little step back and start off with the case-specific discovery. That's defined in this filing as follows. Case-specific discovery principally has included materials obtained from the FBI's case files regarding the investigation of each defendant. Okay, so that is, as you articulated, the evidence that they would produce based on their investigation.
So here's the evidence, Enrique Tarrio, that
we know about
to you. Okay.
Got
it.
The DOJ then goes on to say, with regards to cross-discovery, given the overlap in evidence relating to other individuals and those charged in this case, the government has made a concerted effort to produce cross-discovery. That is, material obtained in other cases that is potentially relevant to the defendants in this case. The volume of case-specific and cross-discovery provided by the government to date includes multiple terabytes of material that has been provided through dozens of productions.
My God. Okay, so the government says there's several terabytes of both case-specific and cross-discovery in this case.
Yes, that's right. And we haven't begun to touch what you referenced as global discovery.
Yeah, and this blows my mind. This caught my attention. In the filing, Department of Justice says global discovery is the government's ongoing production to all defense teams of voluminous data collected by the government in relation to the events of January 6th as a whole. And they contend that, quote, the data being made available through that effort far exceeds the information to which any individual defendant is entitled, but the government is nonetheless endeavoring to provide that data in light of the unprecedented nature of the events of January 6th. That is, hundreds of similar crimes committed in the same place contemporaneously. And that is a lot of evidence.
Yeah, indeed it is. So here's the background that you need to think about this. I referenced it earlier. In addition to having to prove each criminal defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, right, one of the protections that is developed at the Supreme Court level is the requirement that prosecutors turn over exculpatory evidence to the defendant, right? That is what we call Brady and Giglio material. We've talked about that a lot. You've talked about that a lot on your show. And so you want to err on the side of overproduction, right? And again, I've mentioned this before, not a criminal lawyer. Every prosecutor with whom I have ever dealt has had pretty expansive standards for what counts as Brady material, and sort of will agonize over, well, yeah, this is something you could use to impeach one of our witnesses, so therefore we're going to produce it to you right now. So that informs what is spelled out in the filing, which is, to date, these materials, that means the global discovery material. So to kind of put those two pieces together, if something is possibly Brady material for one of the January 6th insurrectionists, it's likely Brady material for the rest of them, right? So to date, these materials include tens of thousands of hours of surveillance video, body-worn camera footage, and public source video, information and data from tens of thousands of tips provided to the FBI and local police departments, hundreds of internal investigation reports into the conduct of law enforcement on January 6, 2021, hundreds of thousands of FBI reports documenting the investigation of all subjects identified as playing a role in the breach of the Capitol, and data seized pursuant to legal process or consent from thousands of digital devices or other digital accounts of those who participated in the Capitol breach.
Good Lord. So, and add that to the terabytes of case-specific and cross-discovery. So why does the government feel it necessary to provide all the global evidence to every defendant when it indicates that it actually exceeds the information to which any single defendant is entitled? And I think you kind of touched on this a second ago.
Yeah, I've been previewing this as we've been talking about it. So here's what the DOJ says, and they're not entirely explaining everything. So they cite the unprecedented nature of the events of 1/6, and that each defendant is in a better position to determine which evidence is material to their defense. So kind of the better to have and not need than need and not have. The reality is, if you fail to provide Brady material that is exculpatory, that's basis for overturning the conviction on appeal.
Yeah, your case could be cooked, right?
If you give them too much, then the worst that's happened is you have given away something that they might not otherwise have known, and you've made it easier to represent these defendants at trial. Given that these trials are going to be slam dunk affairs, that the evidence is just crystal clear, it's not surprising that that's the approach that the DOJ is going to take here. They're like,
so there's no downside to over providing here, because
there's a little bit of a downside. You get to reveal some of your strategy, and it would not surprise me if you heard me pause and giggle a little bit over the documents, including electronic documents of those who participated in the Capitol breach. Right, that is cooperating witnesses. Might there be a value towards letting Oathkeeper number 7 know that, oh, by the way, Stuart Rhodes has given us this, this, and this, and here's where, he calls you codename Aquaman, the dumbest, person on my team or whatever, right? Like that there can be strategic value in that as well. It seems to me. So,
interesting. I think that's really interesting, because that's sort of, to me, indicates a little bit of confidence, a little bit of swagger on the part of the DOJ. Like, you should have at it. You're better equipped to look through this evidence and know what's relevant to your stupid case. Something else that stood out to me in this filing is the mention of additional evidence that the Department of Justice obtained on March 8th. They said that's when Tarrio was being arrested in his undies. They said it executed several other simultaneous search warrants. We know about 2, Stewart and Bertino, but it says several. That sounds like more than 2, but several other simultaneous search warrants, and they need time, about 60 to 90 days, even though they don't know the nature and the volume yet. They're spitballing 60 to 90 days to review all that material at the FBI as it pertains to the most recent second superseding indictment, the one that came out on March 8th. Now, and that's the one that added Tarrio and Pezzola and the handful of new charges I went over in the beginning. Right. But then there's a section in this filing called Third Superseding Indictment. And it says, quote, as explained above, the government continues to investigate and identify evidence relevant to the 6 defendants charged in the second superseding indictment. And the government anticipates that, based in part on evidence seized on March 8th, 2022, it may seek to charge several additional defendants and or seek to add new charges. The government expects that any such superseding indictment would issue prior to May 20th of 2022. And close quote. That's the entire section of third superseding indictment. The reason that section stood out to me is because that's what happened with the Oath Keepers and Stewart Rhodes. They superseded their obstruction and official proceeding charges with seditious conspiracy and added a defendant with that filing. And I'm wondering if that could happen here.
It absolutely could. I think your radar is dead on when it comes to this. And remember, the seditious conspiracy statute requires the use of force.
Yeah, and they have definitely in their Tarrio filings been talking about the force that was used, repeatedly, by saying that even though Tarrio was not present, he still commanded the MOSD and told people they were going to storm the Capitol. And then while it was happening, said, stay there, sit in, and then bragged about it afterwards, saying, we did it. This was us. Make no mistake. We did this, right? Like, wow, thanks for that evidence. Not to mention the repeated descriptions of Dominic Pezzola, who was just added to the second superseding indictment. He was the first to break through a window at the Capitol. That seems like force to me, or at least it seems like the DOJ is indicating that that force was used here. Now, here's a question for you. If they're going to include Donald in this eventually, this conspiracy we've talked about, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding or obstructing an official proceeding, Donald, who was also not present at the Capitol that day, who was also not president at the Capitol that day, who was not present at the Capitol that day, would the DOJ want to have all of this evidence reviewed to deliver as part of that global discovery in his case as well? And I know I'm speculating. I'm way out in front of my skis here. And I'm not saying he'll be charged in this third superseding indictment. That third superseding indictment to me sounds like another rung up, but not to include. But I'm wondering if that's the kind of information they would want to have to meet their discovery obligations. And it might explain, what's taking so long to charge the tippy top of the conspiracy. I think they have to get all the stuff together first.
I think that's exactly right in terms of your view of the plausibility of events, right? Like so specifically, I think the forthcoming third superseding indictment is probably some other link in the chain. Could it be a Roger Stone? Right? I don't know.
It could just be as low as just Bertino and Stewart. These other several people that had raids conducted and executed search warrants on their homes. It could just include them and wrap everybody up in some sort of seditious conspiracy or just a superseding indictment for the charges that currently stand.
Yeah,
but it could go higher up too.
It could. And look, we are carefully watching this to ensure and to keep the pressure on at DOJ that they go up the chain as far as possible. Remember, AG Merrick Garland has said on multiple occasions, and again, this is not just his policy, this is the way in which prosecutors operate, right? That you charge the overt crimes first, right? And then you kind of backfill to charge the conspiracy charges, right? Because it's easier to prove the overt crimes than the conspiracy crimes.
Yeah, and you need to have all that discovery available under the Speedy Trial Act to get it all to them before you supersede with obstructing official proceeding or seditious conspiracy.
Yeah, you absolutely anticipated the second half of my answer there. Right?
Oh,
no.
That's like just people who like step on my punchlines. I step on your legal.
It goes but seriously, it goes to show what great research you've done and just how on top of this story and how well you understand those legal arguments. But yeah, this is a short clock to be running. It's a short clock to run in an ordinary case, let alone one where you have hundreds of defendants, right? Like this is a massive, complex web, right? So, yes, it is my view. I think you are exactly correct that what DOJ is waiting to do is to get all of the evidence in so that they can charge the Proud Boys leaders, Oath Keepers leaders, Aquaman, whatever. And the reason that they were able to initially charge those defendants earlier is because they singled out the folks who were there actually trespassing, right? So it would stand to reason that if you want to drag in the folks who were not there, you need to gather additional evidence. That makes total sense to me. That's not the kind of thing you can rush through a grand jury. If all of a sudden you realize you're 27 days out from arrest and you don't have an indictment handed back yet, right? Which That happens. So.
Yeah. Plus, if you can't get the terabytes of discovery out in 30 days, you could run afoul of the Speedy Trial Act. So that's where the whole, what's taking so long? Well, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes, hundreds of thousands of FBI reports, like thousands of tips. Like, it's a lot. And they had to have all that stuff together and be able to hand it over in 30 days because of rules that protect criminal defendants' rights. Now, it seems if they intended to file a third superseding indictment by May 20th, that if and when the time comes to make a charging decision on Trump, they will likely have and will want to have all of the evidence gathered and reviewed for quick global discovery and cross discovery pursuant to that Speedy Trial Act. So that's sort of kind of what, when we talk about building a case from the ground up, that seems to be clearly what's going on here.
I think that's exactly right. And we've said this all along. If they're going to charge Trump, and that's what we're waiting for. That's a thing that you don't want to get wrong. So
yeah,
I agree with you.
Do you think the judge will grant this continuance since it's not just the government asking for? I mean, I think that they would do it just for the government asking, but we have Tarrio and Pezzola who also want more time.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, the counter argument would be, hey, I have a Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial, and the government is overwhelming us. They're dumping terabytes of information that we have to sort through, and it's not fair. And there are
don't do a coup then.
Yeah, well, I just want to give voice. I want to steel bot the other side as much as I can. Yeah. And give voice to. There is an argument not to grant the continuance, but that argument is, I think, one that's really hard to make here because of the facts that you've described. And I don't think anybody thinks that the government is moving in a fashion so as to make it, so as to overwhelm these, poor defense attorneys who were defending insurrectionists with too much information to slow them down.
And I suppose
that just doesn't seem plausible.
I suppose it's like they're giving it in categories too. Here's your case specific shit, and then here's some cross shit, and then with the other 6 guys that you fucked around with, and then here by the way, here's a global trove if you want to go through this for more exculpatory evidence that you won't find any. Good luck, but they might. Who knows? But here it is. So I feel like the way that they're presenting their discovery gives the defendants more, as they said in the filing, exceeding what they actually have a right to see. And I think that is kind of buttoning it up from the back end, so to speak.
That's right. And let me add that if I, again, not a criminal defense lawyer, but as a lawyer who has prepared for trial on multiple occasions, having agreed upon authenticated documents produced by opposing counsel helps you when you are setting up your pretrial motions, and certainly helps you prepare for trial, because you can both agree that, this body cam footage is authentic, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that if I then have a particular piece of exculpatory evidence that is shot from the same angle, let's say, as the body cam, somebody else's had their cell phone on, right? Then I can now juxtapose the body cam footage that the government has introduced and produced and says, yep, this is legit. And now I can show my own footage, have it match up frame for frame, and then show that extra part. And that would be, I think, really persuasive to a jury. Again, I have no idea if any of that evidence exists or not. I'm just thinking about it from a practitioner standpoint that, you have reasons to want the government to do this as well.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of a roadblock for criminal defendants who were hoping that there was some bit of glowing exculpatory information for the fact that perhaps Mike Pence wasn't there, wasn't in the Capitol complex during the attack, because this is the Couey Griffin case, right? That New Mexico cowboy. Yeah. And his defense was, hey, the Secret Service whisked Pence away to far away, and if there's no head of state on the Capitol grounds, it's no longer restricted space, so I can't have been trespassing. So they brought up a U.S. Secret Service person and said, yeah, no, we took him to a garage under the Senate side. He was at a loading dock. And the judge today ruled Pence was on the grounds. So that takes away that from all 800 defendants who may have used that as a defense. So that was an important ruling today. And that was Trevor McFadden, by the way, a Trump appointee from 2019. So anyway, lots of interesting stuff going down. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the, the news story of the week and of the history of the United States, with the first black woman nominated to the Supreme Court, the confirmation hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Jeff Stein.
And I'm Jean Meserve. Together, we host the Spy Talk podcast.
Every week, we delve into the worlds of intelligence, foreign policy, military operations, and the intersection of all three in national security issues.
Spycraft, cybersecurity, violent extremism, whether at home or abroad, technology's impact on intelligence gathering. We cover it all and much more.
We interview former spooks, military officers, government officials, journalists, and national security researchers, leveraging our backgrounds in military intelligence and homeland security, along with our decades of experience as journalists in news organizations like Newsweek, The Washington Post, and CNN.
So join us every Thursday for a new episode of Spy Talk, available wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, welcome back. Our final story today. Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson began in the Senate Judiciary Committee on Monday, March 21st, and surprise, surprise, it's already ugly.
Ugh.
The two main lines of attack that the Republicans are teeing up are that, one, Judge Jackson's work as a public defender, and in particular defending detainees at Guantanamo Bay, in an amicus brief, by the way.
Yep. And
two, and I can't believe I'm saying this to an actual human being, the QAnon charge that she is a secret pedophile.
Ugly. And by the way, I mean, this is an illustration of the total war that Republicans have declared on this country, right? This fight means nothing to them. This does not jeopardize in any way the activist right-wing mission of their Supreme Court. It replaces one liberal justice on the Supreme Court with another. We're still going to have a series of 6-3 and 5-4 rulings just dismantling existing law.
That's what shocks me about this, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but if they're getting nothing out of it, it seems to me the Democrats are going to walk away with a whole bunch of midterm footage to show in election ads.
Let's hope so, because this is really bringing out, as you pointed out, the Marjorie Taylor Greene level nonsense coming from folks like Ted Cruz, who are hoping that this will, propel him to the top of the 2024 pack, which is just so comically laughable. I want, before we get to the QAnon stuff, let's talk a little bit about the significance of being a public defender. But by the way, something of which there are 0 public defenders, former public defenders on the Supreme Court. And this is on a 9-person Supreme Court, a perspective that I think is long overdue. And I will tell you, you heard me in the B segment as, somebody who is very pro-defendant in criminal justice cases. You've heard me defend the ethics of prosecutors, which I think is correct. You've heard me say that very, very fine lawyers go and spend time as prosecutors and, again, then can still go out and work for justice. That's also correct. I want to say that because the flip side is true, right? That is, non-Trump supporting, non-idiot Republicans who are conservatives, who are lawyers, will tell you, if you sit in a room with them, even if they are, as hardline on crime as you possibly can get, will tell you public defenders do a valuable and underappreciated and under-resourced job.
And constitutionally required job.
Constitutionally mandated, right? Thomas Jefferson, dating back to, the founding, inspirational stories of our country, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that anybody who is arguing in good faith would I think be forced to concede of public defenders work super long hours for super low pay in a constitutionally mandated role, and bringing the perspective on of somebody who has represented, indigent defendants, people who otherwise have tried to represent themselves, is ordinarily the kind of thing you would welcome into a pluralistic debate over what the law means and how the law gets applied. And I can't wait for Judge Jackson to join the court.
Yeah, me neither. And I was particularly, I don't know the adjective to use here, but we'll just talk about Lindsey Graham's line of questioning.
Ugh.
Because he went on about the Gitmo detainees, the process by which the executive branch determines if they're still a danger to national security, et cetera, and that she was part of an amicus brief filed on behalf of Gitmo detainees, and that is somehow a bad thing. And she, she didn't talk about her feelings about the case or where her opinion stands on it. She says, look, I was hired to write this opinion for someone else who had these feelings, and that was my job as a lawyer. And if, Lindsey Graham, you'll know, come on, man, if your client needs you to file an amicus brief about, detainees at Gitmo and torture, people who've been in it, 23 hours of not eating and being held up by their wrists, et cetera, then you write that brief on their behalf. And it, there are then she said there's a lot of times where lawyers representing defendants, whether or not they agree with the stance that the defendant is taking or the plaintiff in the case suing, you do your best job as an attorney to represent what they want you to represent. And she just kept saying that over and over again. And he wanted her to somehow admit that, Rumsfeld and Bush were war criminal torturing a-holes, which they are. But, that wasn't her job in that case.
Yeah. And look, there is a line to draw here, right? So if I were being nominated for a federal judgeship, for example, it would be fair to introduce into evidence every episode of Opening Arguments, every episode of Clean Up on Aisle 45. This is why I will never be nominated for a federal judgeship, by the way. But you would look at, right, a fair-minded person, would sort of look at the things that are most closely tied to the way in which I've practiced law as a guidepost for how would I practice as a judge, right? And for somebody who has been a federal judge for more than a decade and has spent a year on, in the AAA team for the Supreme Court, right? The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, the best way to get a sense of what she's likely to do as a judge is to look at what she's done as a judge. Going back to the arguments raised in an amicus brief 2 decades ago, I think, sort of shows the level of desperation, because, this is somebody who, there are no legitimate arguments against her as a jurist.
Right. It's almost like a 2-year investigation that finally charges one indictment for lying to a guy that no one witnessed and there were no notes to, and that the guy actually testified otherwise too. Yeah. Okay.
And let me make kind of one last point here, because I just want to make it a little bit more clear. And that is, an amicus brief is an advocacy piece, right? A judge's ruling and opinion is a neutral statement of what happened, right, and what the law is. When you write an amicus brief, you are supposed to use the strongest legally defensible language that you can. That's your job as a lawyer, right? That's what the whole zealous advocacy means. So it isn't so much, I just wanted to make sure that our listeners got it clear. It's not so much that like, you're a lawyer, you're a hired gun, you can write whatever the hell you want, right? It is rather that on behalf of her client, she was required to make the strongest arguments possible. And saying, yeah, I think torture could be an international war crime is very different, which, should not be a controversial opinion, but apparently is in the Republican Party in 2022. It is very different than if she had, dropped a footnote in a legal opinion that said, by the way, George W. Bush is a war criminal, which,
I feel like even Comey agrees with me. Like, back off.
Yeah, exactly. So, can we go low?
Yeah. And something else that I really loved today was another thing that Lindsey Graham brought up was some sort of hate campaign against Michelle Childs, his choice for the nominee, and that the progressives were coming out and funding, trying to take her apart, et cetera, because of something. I couldn't even really follow his line of thinking, because he's one to say that Biden is a progressive left-wing radical, but he wouldn't appoint somebody that progressive left-wing radicals apparently were against. I don't understand. But what I found amazing was when Sheldon Whitehouse, I believe,
love him,
took the microphone. He's like, let's talk a little bit about the efforts by the right wing to put who they want on the court, and compare that to because first of all, me personally, AG, I never saw any Michelle Childs attack campaign, and I am steeped in this shit.
There was none.
And he's like, but there was this thing. And he read like somebody's tweet, like one guy said something or something. I don't remember. But Whitehouse is like, okay, let's talk about the $400 million raised by this, dark money, this, to get Coney, to get Gorsuch, to get Kavanaugh on the bench. And like, let's be a little fucking serious about the efforts we're talking about to get judges put onto the Supreme Court from the right and the left. And I thought he laid it out perfectly. And he's been talking about the dark money in the courts for a very long time now. This is his pet project, one of them. And I just thought it was very eloquently put and sort of put them all in their place about, like, please, you're going to talk about a guy's tweet that didn't like Michelle Childs and the main difference between rooting for someone versus raising $400 million in dark money and masking the names of the donors to get people who you want on the bench.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So let's kind of take that sequentially. Number one, this is Princess Lindsey Graham mad that the person he floated was never really taken seriously as a candidate. Well, guess what, Lindsey? You're not the president, and you never will be ever, so you don't get to make Supreme Court nominees. And I'm sorry that hurts your feelings, but that's what you get for a lifetime of being Lindsey Graham. Now, there was absolutely not. And again, it was clear from the outset, before Lindsey Graham piped up, right, that the two main choices were going to be Ketanji Brown Jackson, elevated to the D.C. circuit as literally one of the very first things that President Biden did in 2021, a budding rock star in the party, my number one choice. If we'd have done a Supreme Court fantasy draft, I would have taken Ketanji Brown Jackson number one. I would have grudgingly taken Leandra Kruger at number two, and then if I was third, I would have just gone home, right? Like, I wouldn't have picked Michelle Childs, that's for damn sure. So there wasn't any campaign to destroy the Michelle Childs candidacy. She was somebody that was floated briefly because there was a time when Joe Biden didn't consider Lindsey Graham an insufferable douchebag and talk to him. Sorry.
And Clyburn also was a favorite. South Carolina. South Carolina is, could be said to be what started Joe Biden down the road to the presidency. It was Clyburn who insisted that Biden promised to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, and he almost forgot during that second debate. He threw it in there in the closing statements. And so, that nobody, so that's kind of where that whole idea came from. And there were 9 excruciatingly qualified candidates that he was looking at. So
I do not mean to suggest, based on my fantasy draft and refusal to play that there are not dozens of very, very qualified women of color. I mean, we make this point in the C segment of the show every week, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm glad. I'm to the extent that could have been mischaracterized. Thank you for jumping in on that. So there was never a big Michelle Childs movement to be torpedoed by left-wing sources. And as you point out, this is the way Supreme Court nominees go now because of the efforts of the right wing, by the way, and that is that there is going to be a massive public expenditure by attack groups funded by your usual Koch brothers right wing sources. And to do that, as we've covered on this show on multiple occasions, that means you got to gear up for that fight and you have to raise money in support of your nominee. And so the same left wing quote sources that are backing Judge Jackson right now would be backing Judge Childs if she were the nominee.
100%.
Absolutely, 100%. It's just clear that this, and I don't think that so-and-so wants you to be on the Supreme Court. Well, that's great. Right?
Well, Graham is making up grievances so that six people who are assholes won't be mad at him for voting for anything Biden ever did. And this is obvious because Lindsey Graham has voted to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson how many other times?
Yep, twice.
Yeah.
So it won't be doing it this time.
So what has changed in her judicial past to make her not qualified now?
Well,
it's nothing. Nothing.
If you listen to former
something that was filed 20 years ago.
How about if you listen to former constitutional law professor, and I'm not making that one up, and now Senator Josh Hawley, it's because she's a secret pedophile.
He was a professor? He's 9.
I know. He was a con law professor. This is somebody who knows better, right? Like Ted Cruz, right? Josh Hawley is not just some idiot out there. Like he is a very carefully cultivated idiot who knows better. So
it's just like John Kennedy, fucking Ivy League Rhodes Scholar, and
right? Yeah,
and he's got like chaw on his cheek, and he's got a spittoon next to him in his boots. It's like, fuck you, dude.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the old Greg Giraldo comedy album Midlife Vices talking about G.W. Bush. He's like, he was a cheerleader at Yale. He went to Andover Prep. I'm a cowboy. He.
As soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, it was just like W went to Yale, like Yale
cheerleader,
sir. Yeah, it was in fact. Anyway, so I just want to get out in front of this. We may go into the specifics of the cases on opening arguments, but Hawley's argument is that there are these 9 cases involving child pornography in which Judge Jackson has imposed sentences that are below the federal sentencing guidelines. And I need to help unpack that because on the surface, that statement is true. Now,
so is the statement that a lot of judges have taken a downward departure on many of the January 6th defendants.
So are the following facts, right? And this comes from the 2021 bipartisan U.S. Sentencing Commission, right?
Wait, who writes that? Who writes that?
that is a bipartisan commission, right? Both Republicans and Democrats, right?
From where?
And they are selected from the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Oh, so Congress, Senate Judiciary Committee. Oh, so the people asking the questions today.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, just checking.
Yeah. And again, Judge Jackson served on this more than a decade ago, but this is long free from her influence, right? And again, what they do is they get together and they pick jurists to serve on the committee, and then they evaluate. And the U.S. Sentencing Commission in 2021 notes that the major sentencing guideline, it is section 2G2.2, quote, fails to distinguish adequately between more and less severe offenders of child pornography. Okay. And, quote, most courts believe 2G 2.2 is generally too severe and does not appropriately measure offender culpability in the typical non-production child pornography case, right? So let's unpack that for a second. If you believe that we ought to punish people who produce child pornography, right? That is, participate in the active rape of children more harshly than people who just have child pornography. A, that does not make you pro-child pornography. And B, you would then wind up with a record rather like Judge Jackson's and rather like, as the same report notes, this is page 23, 2/3 of the sitting federal bench, right? Both, appointed by, whether appointed by Democrats or appointed by Republicans. In other words, federal judges typically sentence below the guidelines in 67% of cases, 2 out of 3 child pornography cases, because the guideline is written too strongly, right? That's their belief. That is a uniform belief held by, quote, most courts, not by crazy pro-child porn liberals, right? Now, again, that's the background base. So you've got a situation where judges do this all the time, and yet, because that's going to be difficult to explain in the context of, a blip on CNN, Josh Hawley is like, I'm going to seize on that. In the 9 cases that Josh Hawley identified in terms of having abnormally, what he contended were abnormally low sentences in child pornography cases, 5 of those were cases in which the prosecution moved for a below guideline sentence, right? So in other words, the prosecutors bringing the case said, yep, we brought this case, we won, but as we go to apply the guidelines, we look at those and go, that's not really appropriate for the specific sentencing of this case. So the government, the prosecutors, the people who wanted these offenders in jail said, go below the guidelines. And there isn't a judge in the country when the prosecution says, let's go below the guidelines, who's like, no, forget that. I'm going to go above the guide, or, I'm going to stick with the guideline. Like that's ridiculous. So you're really looking at 4 cases in which defense counsel moved for a downward departure, a below guideline sentence, and that sentence was handed out by Judge Jackson. And again, spoiler alert, it is perfectly consistent with what mainstream judges do in these kinds of cases.
I have a question for you. If a judge ignored the prosecution's request for a downward departure, would the defendant have a stronger case to have the conviction thrown out, or would they have a good case for appeal?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they would walk free. They could walk free.
Right. Okay. Exactly right. Yeah. You could come back and say, that there's, I suppose an appellate court could just narrowly tailor relief to come back and demand that the court impose a sentence within the guidelines. That's a possibility. But yeah, like even don't think about they could go free. Think about that you've now clogged up the courts for another couple of years, right? And you don't want to do that. So this is nonsense, and it's truly disturbing because we know where it comes from, right? It is linked to the QAnon belief that Democrats grind up the skulls of babies after they've raped them to eat the adrenochrome to hold back the reptile lizards. It's
and this is going to feed that conspiracy of 100% deep state on the bench, and they're all they love pedophilia and pizza basements and etc.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Gross. All right. Well, I am. The hearings are actually taking place right now behind me in my living room, and I got up to record from watching them today, and we will go back to watching them, I'm sure, as soon as we're done here. And stomach as much as I can when the Republicans are doing it, because Lindsey Graham was like, let's make sure this isn't a circus. And then he turns it into a fucking circus.
Yeah. You ought to not be wearing floppy red shoes and have a squeezable nose when you say that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of those little horns. Huh? I will continue to watch, but it is infuriating, especially, I think everyone can understand. Everyone who's been watching the hearings, I think, knows what we're talking about. But I will continue to watch them. And remember, we record this. This is actually a special week. We're recording it Tuesday morning for release Wednesday, which is when you're hearing it now. Patrons get it a little bit early, I think, and ad-free. So if you want to become a patron, again, for $1 an episode, as little as, you can add more if you want. You can do that at patreon.com/aisle45pod. And that is the show for today, because, Ketanji Brown Jackson is the comings and goings section, and she's probably going to be for the next week or two. So.
I think that's right. And look, none of this is going to keep Ketanji Brown Jackson off the Supreme Court.
Mm-mm. No, and that's why I don't understand why the Republicans are doing this, other than to just rile up red meat for their base because they're trying out to run for president in 2024.
Perpetual outrage machine. Yep.
Yeah. But I'm triggered. Okay. Okay.
Be right back. Got to make a meme about something you said 5 years ago.
And then something I said last week. And I just retweeted it like, I'm proud of these 2 tweets. Thanks, you guys, for giving me a little bit of a little voice on the other side of people who might not generally listen to what we have to say. But thank you for listening, Andrew. It's been great to see you. I will see you next week, my friend, and I'm sure we'll talk between now and then because I'm super excited to see what happens with the 111 emails that are being reviewed in camera by Judge Clark in the John Eastman Chapman University case. And did you see that additional brief that Chapman University filed? Like, hey, we got guys from 2001 who said it's different from when he was working for Bush here.
And I saw this was a big, Andrew was wrong. I mean, I thought the judge had sort of had enough of Eastman's shenanigans. And when he petitioned to, review fewer documents, the court would be like, what are you doing, bro? But nope. The court said, yeah, go ahead.
Met him
Take
halfway.
your time. And then a day later, John Eastman is gallivanting around to some, bonehead Stop the Steal conference.
That's what I thought was the most amazing. Like, hey, I have a life, Judge, so I can't review 1,500 a day. I can do
burgeoning
750.
law practice. Yeah,
I can do 750, and the judge is like, all right, 1,000. And instead of 750 in another month, you can have 1,000 a day in another 2 weeks. Personally, I think he's like, well, you know what? Whatever. I've read these emails. You're in a lot of fucking deep shit, dude. But we'll see what that ruling is when it comes out, because the judge promised to tell us how many emails were going to get handed over, which ones didn't fall under attorney-client or work product privilege, and I think why, and I think why not as well. This is going to be very, very. I'm excited about that. I think it's going to be the way that we want it to be.
2 votes, crossed fingers, and let's stay in touch, Allison.
We will. Everybody, thanks so much for listening to Clean Up on Aisle 45. I've been Allison Gill.
I'm Andrew Torrez.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Clean Up on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill and Andrew Torrez, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Clean Up on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com.
Hi, I'm Harry Littman, host of Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent figures from government law and journalism for a dynamic discussion of the most important topics of the day. Each Monday, I'm joined by a slate of Feds favorites and new voices to break down the headlines and give the insider's view of what's going on in Washington and beyond. Plus sidebars explaining important legal concepts read by your favorite celebrities. Find Talking Feds wherever you get your podcasts.